I am Nathaniel Rumpelgant, your boss man, and as you can see, I'm wearing a robe today. It's not exactly a special occasion, but I decided that we need to relax a little bit here on the Boss Man. We've been getting a little serious in our topics, and I've been a little shouty at times, I feel. But no, today I'm trying to kick back. I'm trying to relax. I'm wearing my robe of destiny. And we are going to talk about controls. Specifically, we're going to talk about motion controls in Skyward Sword and why so many people are divided on it. Why some people, such as myself, think that the controls were brilliant, and why others, such as, well, I guess the internet, thinks they were so bad. So, let's get right into it. Here we go. Skyward Sword controls. Why they were good and why they were bad for everyone. So, Skyward Sword seemed to be a fulfillment of the Wii's promise of motion controls and what could happen with Wiimotes and one-to-one controls. Now, we had previously seen this in games like Red Steel 2 and Wii Sports Resort. They used one-to-one motion controls to a point. And Skyward Sword tried to adapt those controls for its own means. And when you play the game, you can hold your Wiimote in the air and spin it around and go up and down and side to side. And yes, the sword would actually follow your motions. Now, they went beyond this with the motion controls. They added motion controls to flight, where you would have to twist the remote like this. They added it to the bow and arrow, which they did at Wii Sports Resort style, where you had to lift up the nunchuck and the controller, pull back, and release a button to shoot an arrow, almost like using a bow in real life, which is actually the whole point of the motion controls, was to mimic real life. But it is what it is. And some people really did not like those controls. And it seems their dislike of the controls wasn't so much that they didn't like the idea of motion controls. They didn't like the execution. They thought it was flawed, that it didn't work. Now, we're going to ignore complaints from people like Tom McShay, a former writer for GameSpot, and anyone who, any one of you that actually had an experience like he did, because a lot of his complaints about the controls in Skyward Sword weren't actually about the controls in Skyward Sword. They were about how he wanted the game to control, competing against how the game actually controlled. As an example, people like him would say that the controls were broken, and that they were broken because of things like the bow and arrow, where he would try to point the Wii remote at the screen and shoot, just like in Twilight Princess, and that it didn't work. It made your character face the ground. And only after messing with the recalibration button over and over and over again did it eventually trick the game into letting you kind of sort of aim that way. Now, those of us that have paid attention to all the tutorials in the game and actually play the game the way it was intended to be played know that that's not how you shoot the bow and arrow. The reason that when he pointed forward, Link was looking down, is because the Wiimote is actually supposed to be horizontal and pointing up. So, or vertical, I should say, and pointing up. So you're actually supposed to go like this and pull back and then aim like this. And if he had done that, he would have noticed that's how the bow and arrow functions. It doesn't work like it does in Twilight Princess. So we're going to be ignoring those kind of complaints, because really, it's hard to take complaints seriously when they're complaining about their own incompetence and paying attention to how the game is telling you you're supposed to be playing. That doesn't mean you cannot prefer the point and shoot style. The slingshot actually functions in that manner. However, it's not relevant to our conversation, because it's a complaint to complain that something's broken that's not actually broken. So, for starters, let's go off with why do people love motion controls. Now, this is easy for me to talk about because I sit in that camp. So, for starters, I like motion controls because it makes me feel like I am literally holding and using the weapons in the game. It's not necessarily a contextual button press where Link does all these moves. on his own without me having much say over it outside of the right button combination. Uh, it would be like doing a Street Fighter game, and you would be able to control the literal punches and kicks of your fighter instead of using buttons for him to respond to what you're trying to tell him to do. So Skyward Sword gave you more literal control over the combat, and combat has been kind of forgotten in the series, as it used to be a focus of the game back in the original game's release in 1986. So when you get to it today, people like the motion controls because they like feeling they're in control of the character even more, that they get to control the combat, that they are fighting with a sword, not that they are hitting a button that does all the sword fighting for them. And admittedly, in a lot of the more recent games since Ocarina of Time, you could hit button mash your A button and do all the sword attacks you want to do, or the B button, however, which way you have it mapped. You could just bash the button and it would defeat almost every enemy, and there was no challenge to it. So Skyward Sword offered challenge. You know, enemies that would block, or they would suggest that you can only hit them by doing your sword in a certain direction. And prior, this would be more limited to, did the enemy have a shield? Did the enemy have armor? If the enemy had a shield, you had to wait for him to put the shield down. If the enemy had armor, you had to attack him from behind. That was kind of the extent of the skill you needed to play the game. Otherwise, you could just bash that button like crazy and defeat every enemy in the game. That's not true in Skyward Sword anymore. You could do it for a while. You could waggle your remote all over the place and kill a lot of the early enemies in the game. But you would also fail a lot and get knocked down a lot and get hit a lot more. You are actually making the game harder for yourself by doing that. So people love those motion controls because it gave them direct control over those actions. So if you wanted the sword to slash like this, you would literally slash like this. Now, you didn't have to get as exaggerated as that, and some people felt you need to, and that the game would get a little tiring over time. But for those that loved it, they would learn things like I did, where you didn't have to slash like this, although you could. It actually would add to the immersion of the experience. However, you could also just go like this and do a wrist flick. Not like a little rapid all over the place thing where the game can't register what you're doing, but a wrist flick down like this. Just a nice obvious wrist flick. And you could do it this way, you could do it up and down, up, down to up, horizontal. There's a whole lot of ways that you could do this with the sword. And a lot of the items worked in the similar fashion when you were using the gyroscope controls on the Wiimote. So, in short, people really love the motion controls because it offered them more direct control over the combat in the game, and it arguably made the enemies a bit more difficult to defeat than we are used to. It almost required skill to defeat certain enemies. So now we have seen how motion combat has advanced Skyward Sword and why so many people enjoy it, and some even wish it would return in games such as the upcoming Zelda U. Now, why do people not like it? Well, for starters, there's the whole recalibration. There are times, even when the controls are working perfectly, that you are going to want to recalibrate your controls. Now, oftentimes this is because you are sitting down on a couch, holding your controllers normally like this, and you go pull out the bow and you realize, oh wait, my controller is still pointing down. I should have went like this before I pulled out the bow. And that's going to be a problem for some people because they just don't want to go through the motions like that. Or they just simply forgot to lift their hands up or put their hand in the right position before using a certain item. Again, this is where most of the issues with the recalibration come from. It's just the user not wanting to put their hands in the right position before they do something, so they start doing it and they have to recalibrate to fix it. Thankfully, Nintendo offered that recalibration because they could not have, and they could have made you try to go back out of the item and then raise your arms up and pull the item out again. And that could be a little bit tedious, so the recalibration actually makes that easier, but it also can break your experience with the game. So that's kind of almost a limitation of the technology at the time. So a lot of the frustrations with that come from the limitation of what the Wiimote could actually do, especially with the gyroscope stuff. So as an example, in an ideal world, even if you open up your bow, like this, you open up your bow, and your controllers are facing down, you should be able to lift your controllers up, and Link would actually be facing normal. So Instead, what would happen is you would come like this, and you would want to use the bow. So you take out the bow and your controllers are facing down, and then say you remember, oh wait, I gotta lift it up. Well, now Link is looking up in the sky because the game thinks when you pulled out the bow that the position that your hand is in right now is actually the position of Link looking straight forward. So you could actually still fire the bow like this and pull down and shoot, but you can see how that's you get kind of congested up here. Whereas like this, you have a lot more room. So it could break immersion, and that's one reason, and one valid reason, that it could take you out of the game, because it makes you think about all the stuff that if you were fighting in the real world, you could cock your bow down here and still pull it up and fire, and you can't do that in Skyward Sword. You could. There are actually some times when I use the bow and I never move my remote from here. I would just pull down and let go and aim like this, which can be really confusing for some people. But that's just me. The actual complaint is still valid that it could break immersion, and a lot of it's due to the limitations of the technology. The game can't help it, in other words. There's nothing that Nintendo could have done to actually get that point ironed out for you. Other complaints are that the controls are literally broken. Now, this is people that they will hold up their Wiimote, and they'll even have videos of it, and they will go like this, they will go like this, they will go like this, etc., and the game isn't responding to their motions. Now, we saw this actually live, one of the first times we saw the game in action, on stage, where Miyamoto was trying to take down a Deku Baba, and Link was not really listening to his sword slashing commands. Now, as Nintendo explained this was due to interference. They were using a wireless remote. They weren't using one that's typically wired in for these kind of shows, so you don't have to worry about interference. But they were using the wireless remote, and all the cell phone and wireless and computer interference actually made it so the game didn't respond. And we know this because on the show floor, the game seemed to respond to the controls just fine, making it seem like it really was an interference problem. Now, if you fast forward to people having issues with it not responding, again, that's usually because of an interference issue. Something in your home is interfering the signal of the Wii remote to the Wii. Now, again, this is technically a problem with the technology in the Wii, where it doesn't fully listen to what you're doing. Now, really, anything can block a wireless signal. I have had times where on my Xbox One, using a normal controller, I have had where I hit a button and my system doesn't respond. It's because I had some interference breaking up that signal. And there really isn't a whole lot I can do about it except for find out what the interference breaking issue is. Is it my wireless router? Is it my cell phone? Is it my laptop? Is it some of my Bluetooth devices? With all the wireless devices we have today, there's a chance that one or multiple of them are actually interrupting signals to other wireless devices. In fact, you might notice that if you turn off all the wireless devices in your house except for your router and your laptop, that your laptop actually gets faster internet speed. And that's because there's a lot less noise interrupting that Wi-Fi signal between your laptop and your wireless router. So that's actually why when people get AC routers, you often have a lot faster connection because there isn't really anything broadcasting on the AC signal, so there isn't really anything breaking it up. So when you have that single computer connected to the router on the AC signal when everything else is connected to the end signal, that AC signal is actually that much faster because there's nothing clogging up the lanes. That, and obviously the AC signal has the ability to broadcast it up at a faster rate, but you won't always see that benefit if you have multiple computers connected to that AC connection. So, got a little off track there. So getting back to Skyward Sword, there's a lot of things that can interfere with the signal between the remote and the system, and that's less a flaw of the game as it is a flaw of the technology, and it's a flaw that unfortunately any wireless technology at this point cannot completely avoid because it cannot possibly know what kind of devices you have in your home, and it's extremely hard to test for because it won't always show up. You could have your cell phone sitting on a table in the corner of your room and be playing the game in the other corner of the room, and the wireless signal from your cell phone is not actually strong enough or in close enough proximity to affect the wireless signal between your Wiimote and your Wii. However, it could also be that the device could be totally in the opposite end of the room and the signal's still strong enough. So it's a really hard thing to test for, and it's obviously not something Nintendo considered way back in 2006. Before smart devices were really even a thing. If you think about it, the smart device boom didn't happen until around 2007. So this is long before the Wii was even conceptualized, and there wasn't a whole lot that they could do, such as putting the Wii remote on a different signal on the Wii. It was too late to do anything about that. So yeah, that's kind of where a lot of the complaints stem from, is less to do with the game itself, more to do with limitations of the hardware, such as having to recalibrate, again, a limitation of the hardware, and wireless interference making the controls not work, again, a limitation of the hardware. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, but no, really, everything worked fine, and I just didn't like the controls. That's a totally valid point. You do not have to actually like the controls in Skyward Sword. Some people do prefer to push a button. It is simpler. And there's not much I could say to that because it's really a personal preference at that point. You dislike the controls of Skyward Sword just because you dislike them. There could be any copious amount of reasons for this, and I can't begin to guess because I don't fall into that camp. But if I had to guess, it could just be as simple as maybe you have carpal tunnel, so you just wrist flicks and arm motions aren't really something that appeals to you. You just don't want to do it. You just want to sit back, relax, and just use your fingers. That's totally valid, and that's just one reason I can think of where someone might not actually like the controls for what the controls are. If you dislike the controls because it didn't work or because you had to recalibrate, those are issues that are limitations of the hardware. It doesn't necessarily mean the control scheme itself is flawed. Just that it might be ahead of its time to fully work. It would be like if you're using the D-pad back in the NES and it didn't necessarily register your exact pixel location as you were trying to get it, that over time that response time became better and better and better, and that issue went away. So it would be if Nintendo with the Wii U released new motion controls instead of reusing the old ones, that could have advanced on the technology they already had and made future games more capable of eliminating those hardware limits. That would be ideal. But that's really it. That's the difference between people who like Skyward Sword controls and hate Skyward Sword's controls. Where do you fall? Do you like Skyward Sword's controls? Do you hate Skyward Sword's controls? Do you have reasons I didn't even think of on why you like and why you dislike the controls? Let us know down below in the comments. Thank you for watching this episode of The Boss Man. You can check us out on Facebook, on Twitter, at our website, subscribe to our RSS feed, subscribe to this YouTube channel. You have a great day, and this is The Boss Man coming from the Robe of Destiny. Thank you. Adios. This robe is sent to me for free from Merchoid. This is actually an official Skyward Sword, ironically enough for this episode, it is Skyward Sword branded, robe for The Legend of Zelda. It's officially licensed and everything. And it costs about $80, and we'll put a link down to it in the description. I've seen some other robes go for more than this, but I have to say, at least before the initial wash, the robe feels like a bathrobe. It also feels like if you've ever bought one of those really soft, fuzzy blankets, that's what this feels like. So you already know that as you wash this, some of this light fuzziness is probably going to go away, as it does with those blankets, but it still feels so sweet and so nice. That's why it's my robe of destiny. And now I'm going to use it exclusively on The Boss Man. It's going to be my thing. It's going to be what I do. So yeah, if you really want one for yourself, put a link in the description. You have a good day.